Hey, what's up, everybody? I got Joe Connolly, Director of Performance at Arizona State, head strength coach, titles. I'm super stoked to have him on. Joe and I go really far back, all the way back to, I think I preceded you at Harvard, and then you took the reins as the best intern in Harvard history and beat me out. But my title was tainted because I had a very, very favorably good class of interns that I could out outdo every step of the way. So if my counterparts listen to this, which I doubt he is, I won that intern battle, and then Joe basically took the reins because essentially Fitz hired you everywhere he went, or at least got you set up. And I think that's the ultimate true test, right? You were the best intern in Harvard history, and I have to come in maybe a not too close second. But yeah, it's fired up, man. Thank you for being on. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh man, I don't know if I can, hang on to that title. I think you and I both know. I think Harvard puts out some of the best interns. With Tim Mullen, our dear friend, the Mullinator, running the show up there with the intern program. There's been so many really, really quality strength coaches that came out of there. And if you're going to learn how to coach on your feet, 42 varsity sports and one weight room is a good way to do it.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember I turned at Georgia Tech right afterwards. So just a completely polar opposite. And when I was interning, Tim was faced with, I have 2-3 teams in at one given time. And he's like, this is me saying, I trust you. You're going to be with this team by yourself. I'm like, can you write the program? But like, I need you to be good with running this team because I have 2 teams at the same time and I have no way to not do this. So you get a great opportunity to like lead and like you get this like weird feeling of, all right, I got to go over today's workout and then I got to like organize the racks and then I got to make sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing and just not trying to screw it up. And then you go to Georgia Tech and it's like, just stand here and try not to get in the way, which was like a complete opposite, right? But I had this confidence in me knowing when I was at Georgia Tech, when I do get the opportunity to coach, I've had more reps than anybody else that's just an intern. And when I did, obviously I was able to run with it. But that was because of Harvard, right? Like the trust that Tim Mullen and Fitz and time Dan Perlmutter put in you of like, hey, this is something you need to be really good at because we need your help. And then you go to a place like Georgia Tech. I'm sure situations like you going to Louisville and South Carolina, like, yeah, I'm game ready, man. I'm just such better prepared for that. So if you want to be a good coach, go to an Ivy League school because quite frankly, they're going to be an incubator for your development. But it's a good segue, man, because one of the big topic I wanted to talk to you about today was progression. And why I think it's a good segue is because I think it's a systems thing. And when you're at Harvard and you have 42 sports and literally almost 1,000 athletes with 3 strength coaches, you need to have a really dialed in system from A to B, from your fall sports and training in the off season and your spring sports training in the fall or their off season. And you need to have, okay, this is our plan. We need to go from this to this to be able to get all of our athletes through this almost pipeline like or assembly line like format. And when you start, like, what's a good foundational program all the way to going into season? And now we have the luxury of working with less athletes in football, but same like structures there of like, if I was going to fractal this out or scale this out to 1,000 people, how would I make it through? So the area that I really want to talk to you about is this idea of progression from, hey, we have overloaded number of athletes to 100 still a big number, but it's a lot more manageable than 1,000, and kind of get into that. So first thought is, when you're looking at your off season with football, and let's say that you're going a multi-level program, let's say that you're going inside, outside the box, all the nuances of what you're doing, what is the big 10,000 foot view of, I'm starting here and I want to be eventually at this when we go into maybe spring ball or our preseason?
I think really, for us, and I know it happens a lot in our profession, but we tear everything up every year and start over. And what the athlete needs based on our expertise sort of dictates what we program. One of the things I always tell recruits and coaches is what the athlete needs dictates the program. And you got to kind of explain that, like, no, it's not what they want to do or what they think they should do. It's based on our expertise, what they actually need to do. And that's sort of the start of it, right? So, like, for example, if you have a younger team, you probably wouldn't train them the same as if you had a veteran team in our realm in college football. You know, if you've been training somebody for 4 or 5 years, you're not going to train them the same way as if you've only known them for a month or so. And the great thing about, you know, for me and in my situation in college athletics is you get all that. So your program has to kind of mirror that and be, your system has to be in place where all those athletes can get the physiological adaptation you're trying to elicit at a given time, maybe at the same time, but it's a different adaptation over the course of their career, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years to get the job done in a progressive fashion, right? So, I mean, all that stuff. The way I look at it is, you know, when we originally talked about this and you were like, let's talk progression. I'm like, well, shoot, man, everything's progression, right? Like everything that we do is it ought to be, you know, from exercise selection to loading and volume intensities, from athletic, you know, your acceleration, your deceleration, your change of direction. It's all progression. You have physiological progression, you have psychological progression, you have technical and tactical progression, you have recovery progression, or you should, nutritional progression, supplementation progression. I mean, you could write a book about progression, and a lot of people have, and it would be a really long book because our job is literally, the foundation of our job is using progressions. And the reason for that is that's what drives adaptation. It has to. You and I both know if you do the same program for 4 years, you're going to see a lot of improvement the first year, some the second year, but not as much. The third year, you might see a little bit, or they stay the same. And the fourth year, they could actually get worse. And, you know, when you talk progression and adaptation go hand in hand. And the other thing that goes hand in hand with progression is regression, because you also have to do that all the time. So it's in everything. It's thought about constantly in all the different realms that we sort of are in charge of, and it's super important. And I feel like, you know, younger athletes have a little bit better of an idea, or excuse me, younger coaches have a little bit better of an idea than maybe they used to about it, but they don't understand the nuances of the flow of progression. They don't maybe know, you know, the subtlety of it sometimes, or the dramaticness of it sometimes. I don't even know if that's a word, dramaticness, but it's it's certainly, it has to be there in some way, shape, or form over the course of any athlete's career and in a strength coach's program.
I mean, we always talk about the dramaticness scale of an athlete's program is what determines ultimately their ceiling. So, you know, honestly, there was a point in there as you were talking about, you know, the tactical and the technical. And, you know, as you were talking, it automatically just started ringing a bell in my head about when I was in your shoes in a long, long time ago. The guys you get in early that are going to play right away. And I always struggle with that thought, because you get them in July-ish, and you probably have a pretty good feel like this person's going to either play right away. And, you know, for the folks that don't know, there's a lot of backdoor conversations about, like, your son's going to get a lot of opportunities to play right away, and we're going to give him every chance to do that. And that's automatically impressed upon you as a strength coach when they arrive in August, like, or July, like in the off season, or if they're early enrollee too. Like, and there's this emphasis off of, okay, now they're kind of moving into this varsity threshold, like, of training. And, like, you know, you got July, and we used to call it the de-recruitment period, because basically we're just, like, you know, being super nice to you, and then you get there and it's like all that's thrown out. You're stuck here at least for a period of time, and we kind of get you just assimilated to our environment. And then when it comes to preseason camp, they get a lot of reps because we used to always talk about at USC, it's like every guy coming into this has a chance to be a starter. And that's just fair to them, as well as it makes the older guys a little bit more hungry to keep their spot or maybe go out there and earn their spot. But then you get in season and they're right into this, like practicing 24 periods and getting a lot of reps and training maybe 1-2 times a week at a good lift kind of perspective. And then all of a sudden you get to January and you almost have to start from scratch from what you wanted to get done in July, where it's a lot of these incoming freshmen, you're really thinking like, all right, July is just step one all the way through till we get to, like January. And then it starts a real training process and you kind of lose this big window, but you're behind the eight ball in a lot of areas. So I guess my question to you would be is, the progression is getting them on the field and hopefully they don't get hurt year one. But the huge part of that is the things that we're doing from a development standpoint. And when you're looking at those guys, relatively speaking, to a project guy that we're going to slow play this and he's probably going to redshirt, what's your mindset from a progression standpoint off of July and knowing that he's going to practice a ton in August and play 12 games, maybe even more if you go to a bowl game or a championship game? Like what is the thought process there? Is that something that you think about? Is that something that you incur a lot? Like what is your plan of attack on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously pretty prevalent in college football. The sort of late enrollee freshman that is super talented in the sport, but probably pretty underdeveloped in the realm of general work capacity, deceleration, whatever it may be, right? So for us, it has a lot to do, like we focus a lot on sort of assessment, in that regard early to sort of sift through a lot of the different physiological adaptations that we could potentially, go after to find the sort of the big rocks in that regard for individuals like that. And you're right. I think, more often than not, which young men are going to be in that boat versus the slow cook boat, right? The red shirt or the developmental boat. And, ultimately, I don't really change my mentality in regards to trying to rush anything because I don't think that's a good move either from a long-term development perspective. But I sort of program in a way that attacks the biggest weakness, right? Or whatever it is for some of those individuals. And what I've seen over the years is oftentimes it's pretty similar with a lot of those, 17-year-olds that get into the program or 18-year-olds that come into the program. There's a lot of similarities between, regardless of position, what they sort of need from a programming perspective. So that's the basis for a lot of our developmental program, whether it be movement or just understanding where they are in space, deceleration, those sort of things that, a lot of them need. And then you can sort of parse that off. And if an individual does need something even more specific, then we'll do that as well. So if, for example, like I would have trained Jadeveon Clowney differently now than we probably did back in the day because, number one, I have more information, right? I have ability to kind of find out beforehand with, force plates and Nord boards and velocity based, all the different, strive, all the different things we use. But his program would have been completely different, in my opinion, now than it would have been then because he was such a great accelerator, right? And it's not a lot different for some of those high caliber players now. Those big ticket things that we know are going to be issues and become issues down the road, you focus more on that. And whether it's in June and July and August, and during the in season, to me, it doesn't really quite matter because those big ticket things they're so much more important than some of the other things, as far as like, power or, different types of strength or hypertrophy, things like that. Initially, now I'm not saying those things aren't important later. Of course they are, but initially to make sure that athlete's healthy and available for the long term, you can write a completely separate program for that person now.
Yeah. It's again, when you're talking to, I just feel back in the day when Coach Spurrier was at South Carolina.
Whoever thought me and you'd be talking about back in the day, man.
Right? Yeah, we're old.
I feel like it was just yesterday.
We got kids. We got some salt with the pepper in our beard, man. Like life is catching up to us. But way back when gray shirts were a thing, and you could bring in 50 guys every single year, like. There's these massive overhauls in rosters, right? Like I remember Saban's first year or Jimbo Fisher's first year at Florida State, there was this like complete approach of like 50% of our roster is going to be different next year. Like, and we're going to start with guys who are going to be able to play right away. And that's a huge transition for that strength staff, right? So if you were inherited or you had the opportunity to stay on and transition with the new regime, like all the people that you've been developing for the last 3 years are almost like, hey, find a new place to play or just watch the other young guys come in because we're starting from then because we got a 3-year window to get this thing turned around. And the guys who are going to be good in 3 years are going to get the opportunity to play. And that first year is kind of a mulligan. And from a training perspective, it's not like you're prioritizing one versus the other. Everyone who comes in our room is special and unique and important to us. But as a whole, like, their progression is kind of amplified, and you have to really manage the psychological aspect of like, you did bust your ass and you did everything we asked you to do, just circumstantially, like we have to now prioritize these next wave of people coming in. But it goes into this next thing. And again, like if I knew what I know now, what I would have been back when, but I've talked to a lot of folks and I find this is a common thread with modern day athletics is with transfer portal and just there's nothing like a guarantee from more one year to the next. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, just it's a different world now. And, working with a lot of other like coaches in the NFL and NBA and even Major League Baseball, it's like rosters are just changing rapidly and you have to adjust. And one of the things that was a great conversation I had not too long back with Eric Schmidt with the Memphis Grizzlies was like, I have to utilize things like machines that I never thought were value because I get people who can't even do a bodyweight squat and I need to get them lean muscle mass, or I need to get them maybe coming off a return to play program that they are completely detrained and atrophied. And they need to do something quick that's not going to pretty much crush your CNS while they're playing 82 games and practicing every other day. So we have these freshmen that, that corner that's 150 pounds soaking wet that you're like, I just need to add cross-sectional muscle area to this kid because he's playing with grown men. He's athletic. He's got the twitch. He's got all the right things. But if I can add 10 pounds to that frame, he's going to be that much more resilient. And a machine, at one point in my career, was like the most taboo thing you could possibly imagine. But now I look at it full circle of like, it's actually probably the best tool for the job. And if you have a place like where you're at, like a lot of good resources where you can maybe get a couple of those things and give up a little bit of floor space for it, great. And the rest of us kind of like working in these like weight rooms where we're trying to just get the most from a little with a ton of athletes, like maybe not the best option. But I guess that's my next series of questions is like, now where you're at and you got a premier team and you got a department that's committed to developing athletes at the highest level, do you look objectively at like, here's my job is develop these physical capabilities. I want to look more at a more well-rounded approach from a testing perspective. You mentioned a couple things like ForceDeck and NordBoard, Strive and VBT. Maybe you look at it the other end of maybe just specific isolated exercises like a glute ham or a Nordic hamstring curl or like even machine. Like, do you look now at the tools that you have and what you need a little bit differently than you did when you had like a situation at Harvard? Like, how do you approach that process?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on, certainly you touched on our situation in particular, right? This will be my 6th season here, and When I got here, it was a new coach, and this year we're going through a similar situation where, there's sort of 2 rounds of roster turnover. And then the other thing that was kind of in the middle of that was the start of the transfer portal, right? And so, for us, a lot of our best players that we spent, 2 or 3 years developing into who they ultimately are now left, right? They left because, of money. And it wasn't necessarily any other reason. And that was, on the other end of that was like a tough pill to swallow too, because, you invest so much time and you spend so much time, and then ultimately they walk out the door for, a few bucks, and it's like, that sucks. That's a hard thing to do. But on the other end of that, you have transfer portal athletes coming in to your program that you need to get to know. And so, for us, I think, some of the different tools that we have are really invaluable to kind of get a head start on your programming and your progression, and to be able to sort of input somebody into. So really, ultimately, regardless of whether they're coming into your program or leaving your program, you now with the technology and the different things we have the ability to sort of input the athletes in the right spot within the program, within the system. And it takes the guesswork out of, like the old days, like we were talking about. It allows us to create the adaptation we want to get safely and effectively, and without sort of either jumping ahead and accelerating somebody too fast, or maybe not doing things fast enough. Right?
Yeah. And it's really cool. I think the process of, I think we all face this in our career of, and this is the progression career wise of, things change, and the ability to evolve and adapt to the ever changing environments really determines whether you're going to last in that environment, right? It's like a Darwinian approach of, it's not the strongest that survive, it's the most willing to adapt that live and survive in ever changing systems and ecosystems. So that goes into the next line of questions of, like, I think what is really more transparent is now you have to be a better salesperson for your program, right? Because you're fighting to get people coming into your environment of, here's ASU's way, and here's how this is going to help you become the best possible athlete, as well as on the other end, like, you could leave for more money, but your best chance to play at the next level and have a very long career, which might be more profitable, it's probably better served here in our system, from a performance as well as from a player load management, as well as from a system and tactical perspective. Like, do you find now, like, progression now as a sales tactic for you, where you're talking to your athletes and new athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, ultimately, if you have a good product, right, regardless of what the product is, and you're confident in your product, and the sale is the easy part, right? The why that you present allows your athletes to buy into whatever you're selling. And we feel that way about our system and our process and our developmental criteria over the course of a long-term career. And that allows you to recruit. That's part of our, you get the weekend, recruiting weekend sales pitches that you do, twice a day, every day for however long. And it's all the truth, right? Like, ultimately, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying something that I didn't believe. And, our program, utilizing progression, all the different things that we do are the sales pitch, in my opinion. And if it doesn't come from me, let it come from our players, because they're the ones actually doing the program. It's funny, we had a recruit, and I won't mention the other institution, but we had a recruit that went to a recruiting visit at the other institution, came to our institution, and it was the same pitch, right? It was the same long-term development pitch. And he actually went to the other institution, right? And then a year and a half later, he came back and transferred back to ASU. And he said that they said all the right things, but they didn't actually execute what they said. So there's that part of it too, right? Like I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to, lie. It is what it is, and it takes time and it takes effort and all the different things that go into that. But it's part of the process for a 16 to 18-year-old making a decision, right?
Yeah.
So they have to trust you.
Well, and I think it goes into this level of there's so many strength conditioning coaches that are playing it day to day, and I think having the confidence to say, like, I have a plan here. I see this playing out in a year's timeline or a 3 to 4 year timeline like this. And if I got you for a year, here's how I'm going to approach that problem set. And if I got you for 4 years, here's how I approach that problem set. And for that athlete, that should matter, right? Because it's so easily like, well, they could leave in 6 months anyway. So what's the point? Like, that is not in their best interest. And you fall into this, I don't know, gimmicky, very like fluff-based programming. And the athlete, it may like in a short term go, damn, that was crazy. That was nuts. That was like an incredible experience. And then the next day it's deflating because they're trying to conjure up that enthusiasm again without any really substance. And then when you evaluate from a debrief of like, did I actually make any net improvement? Probably we're no better off, right? And it's like, I always analogize it to like, when I talk to my financial planner and we have a game plan for investment and he's like, hey, I'm going to be straight up with you. Like, IRAs suck right now. We're probably not going to make a lot of money. So you might want to hold off with contributing until this period. I'm like, okay, like that makes sense. I mean, it's a good game plan. It's honest. But like, he could lie to me and say, yeah, just keep dumping money into it. And then maybe I'll diversify that into other things that could make money, maybe in a very misleading way or a legal way, or you could say, hey, look, it's going to take a loss for a while, so maybe you don't contribute for a while. I'm like, I think it's the same thing as strength coaches. Like, yeah, we don't have a really good thing here. You're going into your 5th year of college football, and development-wise, it probably is what it is. So we just got to make sure that you can play 12 games and put out good film. Or I got you coming here, and you're 17 years old, and you're a sponge, and the sky's the limit if you stay here for 3 to 4 years. It's just this, like, being very, like, just telling them how it is. And for them, the consumer of this and buying what you're selling of, is that what you're looking for? And if it is, then probably the best place for you. And I think that process from a strength conditioning is where we really need to be like looking towards the future. In my setting too, now I work in sales every day, and people are buying what I'm selling. They'll tell me if it's not good or they don't value that based on them not buying it. For you, you're fighting for maybe potentially guys who can get you an extra 2 to 3 wins every year and keep your job for another couple of years. And it's an amazing continuum, but it's the same root facts. But I guess in that light too of like, now you have a little bit more information to present to them with all of this compelling and interesting data. So, let's go put your recruiting hat on here, and you're going to me and I'm like, all right, I'm a 4-year guy at another institution. I'm trying to get a 5th year, get some good film out there. How are you convincing me that I'm going to make that great transformative leap into becoming maybe a first-day draft pick?
I mean, sure. I mean, and to your previous sort of example, I think that more often than not, we've still had really, really quality development, even in an older athlete that comes into our program. And whether that is change of stimulus, I'm certainly not blaming another program. We've seen a lot of development with more veteran, whether it be grad transfer or, juniors that get in the portal or whatever. We've seen really good development. So I utilize those examples often, both visual through our player profiles, and then, when we're having conversations, oftentimes I'll get, those individuals down and have them sort of do the talking for me, whether it's somebody that just transferred in and has only been here 6 months and they're, seeing crazy changes, both from a body composition perspective and a force output perspective. Ultimately, it's showing them all the tools we have, showing them how we use those tools on a day-to-day basis and what those tools sort of drive for us from whether it be practice planning or periodization or sets and reps or which block or whatever it is. The athlete gets an idea, a little snippet of what the potential could be, and I think that that goes a long way. And ultimately, too, I think this generation is sort of wired for instant feedback, which I think is, part of that technology piece as well, as we're capable of giving them instantaneous feedback in a lot of different avenues, whether it be, max velocity or yardage or deceleration or acceleration or, body composition, force production, posterior chain strength, muscular activation, whatever it may be. We can get sort of in the moment data that allows our athletes to see progress at a much faster rate than maybe we used to.
Yeah. And I think that's the cool part. It's you seeing your progression too, as a strength conditioning coach, and now looking at it and having these cool conversations about, this is invaluable tools. I mean, I guess it's same with me, right? Like I remember joking about Army West Point. I don't believe in timing. I don't believe in being timed. I believe in timing. And I never would use VBT. I've come full circle and back again on that, because it was a naive thought. It was ignorance on my part. I didn't really understand the true power of that tool from a feedback perspective. But I think it also too is this process of maybe I was afraid of change, and I didn't want that thing to basically supplement me as a strength coach and figuring out what my role would be with this instantaneous feedback machines all over the place, and that was hard.
The old adage of I remember when, people were coming out with different velocity-based training tools, and the argument and the conversations were well, it's going to take the place of a strength coach, right? Or whatever it may be. I am always a skeptic of technology. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't try it. I try everything, and we sort of analyze everything and research everything and talk to different folks around the country that are using certain devices and different tools. Hey, what's the pros? What's the con? And then I usually give it some time. And then if that particular device that gives us whatever metric fits within our system, then I'll use that metric and that system and see what some of the results are before kind of jumping full sail into one camp or another. Because you and I both know that this progression is this profession is it's like fashion, right? Like bell bottoms are in, they're out, they're in, they're out. It's the same thing with us. And I think technology is similar in that regard. A lot of the technologies have been around for a long, long time. Does the software align with how your system works? Does the nuance of programming align with some of the things that you typically do? Does it fit within your system? Is it, able to be utilized within athletic training realm, within the strength and conditioning realm? Can you put nutrition data? What are we looking at, and how does it fit within your system?
Yeah. And that process of how does it fit is one that I think now more so than ever has become probably the biggest problem set that we face. Because I think we all will strive to do the best possible job we can. But it goes into this next level. What is the actual opportunity cost from some of this stuff, right? All right, I want to implement this new piece of hardware. Okay, well, one, how am I going to get that data in a training session sort of jam-packed? how am I going to train my staff to run this so they can be competent when they're out there on the floor? And then afterwards, like, what do I do with now a huge set of numbers that might make no sense for a long period of time until it does? And then what does that mean, relatively speaking, to everything else they could or should be doing in that? And like that process, as we start to look forward in the future, like even just transferring from one piece of hardware VBT to another, like that's a big deal. It's a lot of things that go into that. Like I gotta maybe buy a bunch of stuff, and that might come at the sake of some other expenses I should be putting towards. I got to train my staff on it, and you have to have these like webinars, and you have to talk to the sales reps, and they're going to come in like, well, that's how you set it up and all this stuff. And you're like, I don't even know if this is worth the time anymore. Like, and I just go back to Tendo and just have this thing that says it was 0.45, and that's good enough for me. And like, just keep moving forward, right? Like that was fast or slow. Like that's going to make the decision for the rest of the day. But that'll be a really cool conversation maybe down the road. So I want to take this home because I think there's honestly, like, this is the fun part about these conversations for me, Joe. It's like just being real. And like, I think if I was going to look at PH podcasts as like anything, it's by people who are doing the job for people who are doing the job, right? Like, I think there's a big problem in strength conditioning education off of like speaking in hypotheticals and people talking secondhand about what they would do if they were in your eyes' shoes. And it's all well and good, but it might make me feel insecure or inadequate because I can't do these expansive level protocols or do these amazing things that people are trying to get us to do. But then you think about in the back of your head, like, oh, that's right. They don't work with athletes. They're just talking about what they would if they did, you know? And for this conversation to progress from what it started off to now, I think that's just screaming off the podcast of like, this is people who are doing this, and these are the problems that we're incurring, and these are the things that are real to us. And progression, yeah, it's logical, it makes sense, but progression now has a different context and condition with, I work with a very ever-changing environment that I wasn't used to 7 years ago, and now I have to adapt to that. So I wanted to like take this home with like, you know, like the idea of progression and looking through this really cool, I think, opportunity, because I think it's just growth is good, and depending on what phase of your life, and you know, like necessity is the mother of all invention kind of dynamic. But when you're looking at progression, you know, as a whole, and you know, you have like the best case scenario where you know you have an athlete 4 years and they're just going to drink the Kool-Aid and they're never going to go anywhere. Like, what would be your sign of a like, all right, 4 years of good training. This athlete's been with me from day one. I'm super proud of the end result of like, maybe it's they can do these milestone things in terms of the weight room, or they're able to do these like style of programming, like very short microcycle or like mesocycles or certain exercises. Like, damn, we got this guy can do all variations of Olympic lifts or all plyos. And, you know, is there something at the end of like a 4-year cycle you're like, we did it. Like we did a great job here, you know, like, and you can say, I did what I was supposed to do.
It depends.
All right, I mean, thanks, Joe. Have a great day.
There's like, I love that question, but there's 1,000 variables that it depends on, right? Like, you know that. Ultimately, when an athlete leaves our program, they should be able to do all Olympic lifts and be proficient in all Olympic lifts, right? So, yes. Do they continually improve throughout their career in a multitude of metrics? Yeah, they need to do that, right? Is there ever a stalemate in improvement? No, there shouldn't be. Are they healthy? Do they move well? Are they able to endure a multitude of different physiological, you know, conditions throughout an off season? Yes. Are they mentally, you know, stronger than they were? Has their body composition changed? Have they gained muscle and lost fat? Do they, you know, understand supplementation? Do they understand recovery and rehab? Are they a pro, right? The single probably most prevalent question I get from scouts about our guys is he a pro? Well, you know, I look at that scout and I go, well, what do you mean by that, right? Like, what's your definition of pro? Well, he's got to be, yeah, that those are all things that they need to be appreciated and understand. And it's all encompassing, right? Like, I don't think somebody that doesn't do this for a living understands everything that goes into it. And then all the different balls that are being juggled at any time that could potentially be super beneficial or super disastrous at any point in time, depending on timing, depending on the sleep they got last night, depending on if they broke up with their girlfriend, depending on if they get a little lax at the bottom of a squat. I mean, just anything. All the little details are just so important. And I know that was a long-winded.
Oh, it was perfect.
More of a tangent than anything, but it's there's so many variables that go into answering that question. You could do a podcast on that question alone, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's amazing. And I guess as when you ask the question, you think about how you would answer it as well. And, you look at it from the dynamic of how do you define a good job versus the bad job? And I could say they're stronger, they're faster, they're more capable. But the truth is, and I'm in the other end of it now. So I get your guys when they're done playing and they move to LA and they go, I just want to continue training and I like my college experience. And I look at it from the context of if I ever train someone and have to go somewhere else, could they be self-sufficient? Could they be responsible with how they approach the weight room of not being a hero, not being someone that is ego lifting and have an environment where someone's like, I can do this for the rest of my life safely and efficiently. And I think that's a pretty good, check the box. And I feel confident that, the guys that had even to the point of the guys that had an Army would go off and do CrossFit. And I'm like, you're probably better off than anyone else out there because you went through 4 years of really good training. You're going to be fine. I'm not as worried about you as opposed to the person that doesn't have these good foundational habits and infrastructure of approaching something. You have no idea what that is. I've never done that exercise, or I've never done the set rep scheme. I've never done this setup. So I'm going to be a little bit more pragmatic and maybe I go out a little bit more conservatively because I've been on the other end and I got destroyed or crushed because I was not that way. And just having that foresight and that perspective of training as a process. And if you're not familiar with it, you need to be very conservative as well as you are familiar with it. Don't waste your time, man. You got to go for it a little bit and you got to push and just having that mental bandwidth and being self-reliant too is so important as well.
I think you're right on the money. And I like that sort of thought process in that if you took any one of, our guys, I feel like if they went somewhere else, they would be able to do every exercise that's thrown at them. We're talking obviously people that have been in the program, for a long time. Any exercise, any rep range, any load parameters, any volumes, any intensities, and as a coach, not being confined to one sort of, I don't know if it's a philosophy or just a mindset, be open to be able to do anything. I've been super fortunate, right? I've never been with a head coach that micromanages the weight room. And what that's allowed me to do is over the course of my career to not be afraid to take chances on different things, trying new exercises to elicit a response, trying new rep ranges or progressions in, and I've also never had to he has to clean more this time than last time, right? Well, what if we used a hang clean instead of a Olympic clean or a power clean instead of a Olympic clean? If I was working for a head coach that said, oh, they have to clean more, then you wouldn't be able to use as many variations because you're stuck with that one variation. And then you just got to kind of keep repeating it over and over again and then inflate numbers because you want to keep your job. I've never had to do that. And The other thing you touched on, I think, is really important, is that I always try to ask every athletic director that I ever have worked with or has overseen sports performance. I always ask them, how am I graded? How am I ranked? How am I measured? Like how do you measure what I do? And the myriad of answers that I've received is crazy. Like everything from, well, did the guys like it or not?
Yeah.
Are they continuing to improve? And I'm like, okay, well, in what? Are you looking at specific metrics? No. Are you talking numbers? I don't know. Um, so I feel like with sports performance, maybe more than anything else, it's this sort of unknown, right? In regards to sort of how you're ranked. And a lot of times it has absolutely nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
It has everything to do with recruiting and what the head coach says about you.
Yeah.
And that's the perception that becomes reality. And I think going into this profession, that's something that I try to certainly educate our interns on and some young coaches. Like, sometimes you can do everything right and still get fired and still be wrong. It's super interesting, the dynamics that we work in. I mean, I went from working for one of the oldest head coaches in the country to the youngest head coach in the country. And it's been a breath of fresh air for me because, and I think it's trending this way. And, we had a lot of discussion about technology and information and data, and then actually utilizing that data to drive progressions, not only in the weight room, but maybe during individual or during practice, driving intensities and workload in practice and actually making like thoughtful scientific changes that aren't just intuition in, the progression of practice. So I couldn't be more excited about that piece personally, but everybody doesn't have that situation.
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't have that. If you go work for, Nick Saban, it's probably not going to be that way. You're probably going to do what he wants to do. And I don't know the answer to that specifically, but it's everywhere's different. And if you can't adapt and change and be okay with it and kind of have an answer ready to go, then you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. I think there's another really great conversation to be had about, I'm assuming this is the longest tenure you've ever been at one job, right?
I was at South Carolina for 7 years, so this will be my 6th year here.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, I mean, you have now probably one of the unique aspects in strength and conditioning of seeing the full life cycle of an athlete, right? And not many people do reach that threshold, which is cool. It's interesting. And hopefully buy it a little bit more time and you can surpass that 7-year mark, which is, I mean, your experience at UMass and a lot of your short-term stints other places, like, yeah, that's kind of like the norm of like, go in, try to make a big impact. Hopefully you're there long enough to survive another year, if not get another job. And like, when you get to this 6-year threshold, it's, you have to evolve within that institution versus you go to a new place, you evolve to that new place organically. And I think there's an element of change is really interesting off of like, I have to adapt to this new environment because what I did in the previous place wasn't successful or it doesn't work here, versus now it's like, you got to find out creative ways to change to, one, like make necessary changes to improve, but two, is it just actually trying to just keep it interesting, and is it actually necessary, and like what's continuity at the sake of complacency versus what's the actual like necessary changes to improve upon the things that we weren't as good upon last year. And like that's a fun conversation to have as well, which I guess is progression in itself too,
I think for me with this most recent coaching change, I didn't know what was going to happen. And well, ultimately, when we were fortunate enough to stick around, my mindset was like I moved out of my office and then moved back into my office because it was a new job. It was the same place, but it was a completely new job, and anything that we knew is gone. And now we have, and I had a lot of discussions with my staff about that. I'm like, you guys, nothing that we've done in the past doesn't matter. Everything can change, and you have to be ready to do that at any given moment, or else it's not going to work. Yeah. So don't feel bad. It's just, it is what it is. And that if we want to move forward in a positive way, we have to do that. And, so far it's gone really well, but that was my mindset. Like I parked in a different spot. I used to park in one spot. Now I park in another spot. I have I changed lockers. Like everything was different for me because I feel like mentally I had to sort of go through that because it was different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's so easy to fall into this is the way we've always done it. So, and they don't want to hear what you did previously.
No one cares.
Yeah. And then quite frankly too, it actually might work against you if you are like stuck in the past, because it's going to feel like you resent the fact that you're working with new people. Like you have to embrace this new opportunity 100%, which is a great survival strategy as well as like a great optimizing thing. Like you have to take this approach. And you said it, like every single year at the beginning of the off season, we just start from scorched earth. It's tear the page, which is great, man. So Joe, man, I just honestly, this was cool, fun. Like I wanted to catch up and connect, but like, man, like this is like really why, like you could tell like, now you've been a head strength coach for over, 14, 15 years in some capacity?
No, not quite that long. So 2000, end of 2011, 2012 was when I
over a decade though. Over a decade, right? Like you could tell, like that is, and no one knows how to be a head strength coach until they're a head strength coach, and then it's all on the job training. And the reason why you got over a decade is because of this. Like you were able to approach each year differently and a better person for it, where the ones that kind of stick in their ways of like, I've arrived, I am who I am, like probably not gonna be a head strength coach very long, which is great, man. I am so stoked for you and this opportunity you have in front of you and everything else that you got going on in your life, man.
No, I appreciate you, Tim. You've always been a friend and a resource, and you're by far the best intern to ever come out of Harvard. So it's not even close.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the ultimate indicator is going back and see if people care.
The fact that you had the wherewithal to do what you did, I can respect it more in that you got out when you wanted to get out, and you changed your entire everything, and you've done it in such short time, and you've been able to be successful doing it. It's like I have so much respect for you in that regard. I don't think people realize, how much work you did to get to where you are, kind of like two different realms, right? In the collegiate sector to get to a super high level, and then now at the private sector to be at that super high level is, that's a testament to you and how freaking smart you are and how hard you work.
Thank you, man. It's funny. Like I would say the beginnings of both are extremely similar. Like where as an intern, no one gives a shit about you. Like you are nothing. Like, and they don't care. You can come and go. Like you're free work, and name's not going to be remembered. And then starting off with your own business, they don't give a shit. Like hey, you realize I was featured on USA Today with my salary as one of 140 people in the entire world as a head strength coach at Division I level, which is very elite. Like very,
very. Get a big raise too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we did pretty well my last year there. I walked away on my own terms. It wasn't like I was leaving with my tail between my legs, and they didn't care. In fact, they had very little bandwidth of what that actually meant and how that actually involves them. mostly just like, are you close? Do you have showers? And does this kind of like check some boxes from what I'm looking for from an exercise experience? But oh man, I don't really give a shit if you have multiple master's degrees and you have unlimited amount of experience. Like, it just really doesn't matter. So you have to start again from nothing, and you have to approach each thing every single day of like, I got to earn it, and I got to earn respect, and I got to build myself up. Which, honestly, Joe, like, I think as I look back, like, I think it's the willingness to embrace, like, man, you're only as good as what you're doing for the person in front of you. So if you start a podcast and like, you're just dead air and you just suck at conversation, no one's going to listen to you. They don't give a shit. Like, 0 downloads is a great indicator if you need to improve your podcast, and like, do you have good conversations? Can you connect to people? Like, you know what I mean? Like, every new first step, it's like if I was going to do any DIY projects, which, like, shout out to my wife who has very little faith that I can do anything around the house, but I'm going to be bad for a while. Yeah, my wife has zero faith. I have like all these great ideas. She's like, you couldn't do that. Like, why would you say that? Like, either way, like, I'm going to give it a shot. Yeah, how do you know? Like, I'm capable and confident in other areas. But again, like, that beginner's mindset and that approach to being humble and fuck, man, no one should really give you the benefit of the doubt until you earn it, and I think that's a great motto, which I've approached in my life. So I appreciate you saying those kind of words.
No, man, you're right on the money. My mother always said, he's a nice young man, but he's not very handy. He's not mechanical, and I'm like, what? Why do you have to add that in? I don't understand. It's nice, but I'm not good, And now my wife says the same thing, and I'm like, I'm busy doing, something else. If I spent as much time as I spend doing what I'm doing now, in construction, I think I'd be pretty good at it, if it was something that I was passionate about.
Yes. Thank you.
You can dog me if you want. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, and the other part is like, we rent. So it's like, I don't, like, why? What do I care? It's not, I have zero to gain from this. Like changing a light bulb, like, yeah, I could do it, but I just rather not. Like, either way, I digress. Shout out to our wives. They won't listen to this anyway. So
no, God, no.
Yeah. So I mean, that's
even if she did, I'd get like a spreadsheet of critiques. I said too much, right? Like, or whatever. It's God, well, she's the best. She's the best editor. Maybe she should edit the book we got going.
Yeah, maybe that's a good call. My wife wouldn't have the bandwidth nor the interest to do anything on that related. So, but well, no, man. Again, appreciate it. And do you want people to find you, or you want to just keep this like this mystique about you? Like, yeah, it's always the hard question of like, oh, by the way, people might be interested in like learning more from you, but do you actually even care if that's a thing? So
I personally don't, but I do have a social media. Oftentimes it's strength and conditioning, my daughter, and barbecue. That's about it. If those are some things you're interested in, that's about all it is. Occasionally a family photo or something like that. On Twitter, all that stuff. Facebook, no TikTok, none of that garbage.
It might be gone here soon. So by the time this comes out, TikTok will be gone. Yeah, I know. Keep social media domestic. That's what I always say. That's it, man. I like my cars and my social media domestic. Although I own a Tacoma right now, so
I'm trying like hell to stay off it as much as I can. And
it's not for you. Yeah, it's not for us.
I used to be all in and posting, and now I try to stay off. I have so many other things that I need to be doing or should be doing, and ultimately, who cares if somebody sees it or not? I don't.
I know. Yeah. I think it's a great, like, I've always admired some of the folks that I've coached with who are just so present in the moment, because it's so hard to do when you're always thinking a step of like, what's my backup plan here? What if this goes under? Like, if a coach was going to see my social media, would they be like, damn, I need that guy here? Like, you're always thinking about that. But the reality of the situation is if you can just focus on the people and the job at hand, you're probably just going to be fine,
I can't tell you how many people have told me to build my brand and, this and that. And it's like, I do that every day. you know, with the athletes and my staff and the coaches that I work with. And that might take longer, but I don't, you know, that's more important for me than anything else. And doing a friend's podcast is something that I consider super important. So that's why I'm here.
Well, on the note of that, man, like the two highest paid strength and conditioning coaches right now between Rob and Ben don't seem to have any social media presence. So you're probably really good at their job, you know, and the people that decide what they get paid agree. So, yeah, there's a great indicator. You don't need it if you're really good and you work hard, you know. But man,
Yep, no, I agree.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you again for the time, and yeah, like I look forward to seeing this next year for you, man. It's going to be exciting.
It'll be interesting, learning something every day and learning a new process or a new way of looking at things, and it's exciting,
Yeah,
motivating.
Yeah, hell yeah, man. Awesome, man.